Marcus Thompson stood outside Prestige Motors, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was early morning, and the dealership gleamed under the soft sunlight, its shiny cars lined up like trophies in the showroom. For years, Marcus had dreamed of owning a business like this, a place where people could find not just vehicles but trust and respect. And now, after months of negotiations and paperwork, it was finally his. But Marcus wasn't ready to announce himself just yet. He wanted to see how things worked inside before stepping into his role as the new owner. Dressed casually in a gray hoodie and jeans, he decided to visit the dealership incognito. His goal? To observe the staff, understand their dynamics, and get a feel for how customers were treated. Little did he know, this decision would lead to an unforgettable encounter. As Marcus pushed open the glass doors of the showroom, a bell chimed softly, signaling his arrival. The air smelled faintly of leather seats and polish, a scent that always reminded him of ambition and success. Inside, the dealership buzzed with activity. Salespeople moved between cars, chatting with potential buyers or typing away on their phones. At the far end of the room, a man in a crisp suit sat behind a desk cluttered with papers. This was Greg Harper, the current manager. Greg glanced up briefly when Marcus entered but quickly returned to his work. To Greg, Marcus looked like any other casual visitor, someone who probably didn't have much money to spend. Greg prided himself on maintaining a professional image at Prestige Motors, and he often judged people based on appearances. In his mind, there were two kinds of customers, those who mattered and those who didn't. Unfortunately for Marcus, Greg assumed he fell into the latter category. Unaware of Greg's thoughts, Marcus wandered around the showroom, taking in the rows of gleaming sedans, SUVs, and sports cars. He stopped near a sleek black luxury sedan and ran his fingers along its polished surface. The car was stunning, the kind of vehicle that turned heads on the road. A nearby salesperson noticed Marcus admiring the car and hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. When Greg caught sight of the interaction, or lack thereof, he sighed audibly and got up from his desk. "Can I help you?" Greg asked, approaching Marcus with a forced smile. His tone was polite enough, but there was an edge to it, a subtle hint of impatience. Marcus turned to face him, unfazed by Greg's demeanor. "Yeah, actually," he said warmly. "I'm interested in learning more about this model. What can you tell me about it?" Greg crossed his arms and gave Marcus a once-over, his eyes lingering on the hoodie and sneakers. "This is one of our top-tier models," he replied stiffly. "It's designed for discerning buyers who appreciate quality and performance." Marcus nodded, pretending not to notice the implication behind Greg's words. "Sounds impressive. Do you mind if I ask about pricing and financing options?" At this, Greg raised an eyebrow. "Are you pre-approved for financing?" he asked bluntly, his tone dripping with skepticism. Marcus chuckled softly, sensing the underlying judgment. "Not yet, but I'd like to explore my options." Greg's patience began to wear thin. "Sir, if you're serious about buying, we recommend coming back with some documentation or proof of income. Otherwise, it might be better to look at more affordable options elsewhere." The comment stung, but Marcus kept his composure. He hadn't expected such blatant dismissal, especially at a dealership known for its customer service. Still, he decided to play along for a little longer, curious to see how far Greg's assumptions would take him. Little did Greg know, the man standing before him wasn't just another customer browsing cars. Marcus Thompson was about to become his boss, and this encounter would soon teach Greg a lesson neither of them would forget anytime soon. Greg Harper's frustration only grew as Marcus continued to browse the showroom. To Greg, Marcus was just another time waster, someone who didn't belong in a place like Prestige Motors. He couldn't understand why this man in a hoodie kept asking questions about cars that cost more than most people made in a year. Every word Marcus spoke seemed to irritate Greg further, and his polite demeanor began to crack under the weight of his growing annoyance. Marcus, on the other hand, remained calm and composed. He had dealt with prejudice before, but something about Greg's behavior intrigued him. Was it arrogance, ignorance, or simply a lack of professionalism? Whatever it was, Marcus decided to push a little harder, not out of malice, but to see how far Greg would go. As Marcus moved toward another car, a shiny red convertible, he pulled out his phone and started snapping photos. "This one's pretty sharp," he said aloud, half to himself and half to no one in particular. The sound of the camera clicking echoed through the quiet showroom, drawing glances from nearby staff members. One salesperson hesitated, unsure whether to step in, while another quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Greg, however, wasn't going to let this slide. Marching over to Marcus, he planted himself firmly in front of the car, blocking Marcus's view. His face was flushed, and his jaw was clenched tightly. "Excuse me," Greg said sharply, his voice cutting through the silence. "What exactly are you doing?" Marcus lowered his phone and raised an eyebrow. "Taking pictures," he replied matter-of-factly. "Is that a problem?" "It is when you're disrupting our business." Greg shot back. His tone was icy now, leaving no room for argument. "We don't allow photography here without permission." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Greg's expression. There was anger there, yes, but also discomfort, as if Greg knew deep down that his reaction was unreasonable. Still, Marcus didn't argue. Instead, he slipped his phone into his pocket and gave Greg a small smile. "Fair enough," he said smoothly. "I'll keep that in mind." But Greg wasn't done. Seeing Marcus's relaxed attitude only fueled his irritation. In his mind, this guy was mocking him, pretending to be harmless while secretly causing trouble. Greg pointed toward the exit, his finger trembling slightly. "Look, I think it's best if you leave," he said firmly. "You're clearly not interested in buying anything, and we have real customers to attend to." The words hung in the air, sharp and biting. Several employees stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others pretended to focus on their work. A few potential buyers lingered nearby, curious about the commotion. Marcus crossed his arms and met Greg's gaze directly. "Not interested in buying," he repeated slowly, his voice steady. "That's funny, because I've been asking about prices and financing options this whole time." Greg scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Come on, don't play games with me. People like you don't shop here." The moment the words left his mouth, Greg realized he might have gone too far. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. For the first time since entering the showroom, he felt a flicker of anger. Who did this man think he was? And what did he mean by people like you? Before Marcus could respond, Greg pressed on, determined to regain control of the situation. "Listen, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this isn't the place for it. You need to leave. Now." Marcus took a deep breath, weighing his options. Part of him wanted to reveal the truth right then and there, to watch Greg squirm as he realized who he was dealing with. But another part of him knew that wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would make things worse. So instead, Marcus nodded slowly, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll go, but trust me, we'll talk again soon." With that, Marcus turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. As the glass doors swung shut behind him, Greg exhaled sharply, feeling a mix of relief and unease. He glanced around the showroom, noticing the stares of his coworkers and the puzzled looks on the faces of potential customers. For a brief moment, Greg wondered if he'd made a mistake, but he quickly shook off the thought, convincing himself that he'd done the right thing. After all, Prestige Motors had a reputation to uphold, and Marcus, whoever he was, didn't fit the image Greg had in mind. What Greg didn't realize, however, was that his actions had set off a chain of events that would change everything, for him, for the dealership, and for everyone involved. As Marcus stepped outside the glass doors of Prestige Motors, he paused for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over him. His hands were shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, and his jaw was clenched tightly. For someone who prided himself on staying calm under pressure, Greg's behavior had struck a nerve. It wasn't just the dismissive attitude or the rude comments. It was the blatant disrespect disguised as professionalism. Marcus couldn't help but feel angry, not just at Greg, but at the system that allowed such prejudice to thrive unchecked. Inside the showroom, Greg watched through the window as Marcus lingered near the entrance. He felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. On one hand, he'd successfully removed what he saw as a problem from the dealership. On the other hand, something about Marcus's demeanor unsettled him. The man didn't seem like someone who would simply walk away and forget about the incident. There was an air of confidence around him, a quiet authority that Greg couldn't quite place. Determined to prove his point, Greg marched toward the doors and pushed them open. Stepping outside, he stood face to face with Marcus, his arms crossed firmly over his chest. "I told you to leave," Greg said sharply, his voice carrying a note of finality. "Are you deaf, or do you just enjoy wasting people's time?" Marcus turned slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Greg's. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was palpable, like storm clouds gathering before a downpour. Then, without raising his voice, Marcus replied, "I'm not here to waste anyone's time. I came to learn more about this dealership. And now I know exactly what kind of place it is." Greg frowned, confused by the comment. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded, his tone laced with irritation. "You think you're clever, don't you? Walking in here acting like you own the place." Before Greg could finish his sentence, Marcus interrupted him, his voice steady and commanding. "Actually," Marcus said, taking a step closer, "I you own the place. As of yesterday, Prestige Motors belongs to me." The words hit Greg like a punch to the gut. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. For a split second, he thought Marcus was bluffing. Some kind of prank or revenge tactic. But then reality sank in. The pieces clicked together. The questions about pricing, the casual confidence, the way Marcus seemed completely unfazed by Greg's insults. This wasn't just some random customer. This was the new owner, the man whose name had been floating around in emails and memos for weeks. Greg's face turned pale, and his arms dropped limply to his sides. "Wait? What?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. You're Marcus Thompson." "That's right," Marcus confirmed, his expression unreadable. "And judging by how you've treated me so far, I'd say we have a lot to discuss." At that moment, the showroom doors swung open again, and a few employees peeked outside, curious about the commotion. When they saw Greg standing there, flustered and speechless, whispers began to spread. Someone murmured, "Is that really him? The new owner?" Another employee nodded silently, their eyes wide with disbelief. Greg tried to recover, stumbling over his words as he attempted an apology. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't realize. It's just that. Well, you weren't dressed like." "Like what?" Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through Greg's stuttering explanation. "Like someone who could afford a car, like someone who deserves respect." Greg swallowed hard, unable to respond. His earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by sheer embarrassment. He glanced back at the showroom, where several customers and staff members were now watching the scene unfold. Some looked amused, while others appeared horrified. Whatever credibility Greg had built as a manager was crumbling right before his eyes. Marcus let the silence hang for a moment longer, allowing Greg to fully absorb the weight of his mistake. Finally, he spoke again, his tone firm but measured. "Don't worry about apologizing right now. We'll talk later, in private. Until then, I suggest you rethink how you treat people who walk through those doors." With that, Marcus turned and walked away, leaving Greg standing frozen on the sidewalk. The manager's mind raced with dread as he realized the gravity of the situation. Not only had he insulted the new owner, but he'd done so in front of witnesses. As the glass doors closed behind him, Greg knew one thing for certain. His career at Prestige Motors might never be the same again. Later that day, Marcus called a staff meeting in the showroom. The employees gathered nervously, unsure of what to expect. Some had heard about the confrontation between Marcus and Greg, while others were still piecing together rumors they'd picked up from coworkers. The atmosphere was tense, with whispers filling the air as everyone waited for their new boss to speak. Marcus stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding attention without him having to say a word. When the murmurs died down, he began, his voice calm but firm. "Good afternoon, everyone. First, let me start by saying how excited I am to be here. Prestige Motors has a reputation for excellence, and I'm honored to take on this role as your owner." A few employees nodded politely, though most remained silent, their expressions guarded. Marcus continued, pacing slowly as he spoke. "But if we're going to keep building on that reputation, there are some changes we need to make, starting with how we treat our customers." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Yesterday, I visited this dealership as a customer, I came here to see firsthand how things operate, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Unfortunately, what I experienced wasn't acceptable. The room grew quieter, the weight of his statement hanging heavily over the group. Marcus didn't name names, but it was clear he was referring to Greg's behavior. I was dismissed, judged, and ultimately asked to leave, all because of assumptions made about me based on my appearance. That's not professionalism. That's prejudice, and it has no place here. One of the salespeople shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing around the room. Another employee stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact altogether. Marcus noticed their reactions but kept his tone even. Let me be clear. Every single person who walks through these doors deserves respect. Whether they're browsing casually or ready to buy, they deserve to feel valued, not judged. To drive his point home, Marcus outlined specific steps he planned to implement immediately. Mandatory diversity training would be introduced for all staff members, focusing on recognizing unconscious bias and fostering inclusivity. Customer feedback forms would also be distributed after every sale or interaction, ensuring accountability. Additionally, Marcus announced that promotions and bonuses would now depend not only on sales numbers, but also on customer satisfaction ratings. When he finished speaking, the room remained silent for a moment. Then Sarah, one of the senior sales associates, raised her hand hesitantly. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "what happens if someone doesn't adapt to these changes?" Marcus met her gaze directly. "That's a fair question," he replied. "Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Anyone who refuses to embrace these values will have to reconsider whether this is the right workplace for them. We can't grow unless we're all moving in the same direction." His response sent a ripple through the crowd. While some employees seemed relieved by his leadership, others, like Greg, looked uneasy. As the meeting wrapped up, Marcus reminded everyone of his expectations. "This isn't just about rules or policies," he said. "It's about creating a culture where everyone feels welcome. Together, we can make Prestige Motors better than ever." As the staff dispersed, conversations buzzed quietly. Some were optimistic about the changes, while others worried about what lay ahead. But one thing was certain. Marcus Thompson meant business, and nothing would stop him from transforming the dealership into a model of progress and inclusion. In the days that followed, Marcus wasted no time putting his plans into action. The dealership buzzed with activity, not just from customers, but also from the flurry of changes Marcus had introduced. Posters about inclusivity and respect were hung in the break room, mandatory diversity training sessions were scheduled, and new customer feedback forms were placed prominently at the front desk. Employees tried their best to adapt, though some struggled more than others. Greg Harper found himself at the center of this whirlwind. After the meeting, he spent hours replaying Marcus's words in his mind. Asterisk, every single person who walks through these doors deserves respect. Asterisk, those words echoed endlessly, gnawing at him. For years, Greg had prided himself on being a professional, but now he realized how flawed his definition of professionalism truly was. It wasn't enough to sell cars. It was about how you treated people along the way. One afternoon, Marcus called Greg into his office for another private conversation. This time, the atmosphere felt less confrontational and more reflective. Marcus gestured for Greg to sit, then leaned back in his chair, studying the man across from him. "How are things going?" Marcus asked, his tone neutral. Greg hesitated, unsure where to begin. "Honestly, sir, I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he admitted. "About treating everyone fairly. I know I messed up. Badly, and I want to do better." Marcus nodded, encouraging him to continue. "What made you act the way you did?" he asked gently. "Was it fear? Habit? Something else?" Greg sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as if trying to organize his thoughts. "I guess it's habit," he said finally. "For so long, I judged people based on appearances because I thought it helped me focus on serious buyers. But looking back, I see how wrong that was. Not everyone shows up in a suit or drives a luxury car. That doesn't mean they don't deserve respect, or that they aren't capable of making big decisions." Marcus listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," he said after a moment, "and I appreciate your honesty. But admitting it isn't enough. You have to prove it through your actions. Greg nodded earnestly. I understand, sir. I'm willing to put in the work. Whatever training or guidance you think I need, I'll do it. I don't want to let this dealership, or you, down again. Marcus studied him for a moment longer before speaking. Here's what I propose, he said. You'll attend every diversity training session we offer, and not just show up, but actively participate. I also want you to shadow Sarah for a week. She's one of our top performers, and she treats every customer with genuine care. Learn from her example. Greg agreed without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, he immersed himself in the process, attending workshops and observing Sarah's interactions with customers. At first, it was uncomfortable. He felt out of place and self-conscious, but slowly, he began to see things differently. He noticed how Sarah listened patiently, asked thoughtful questions, and made each customer feel valued, regardless of their appearance or background. One day, during a role-playing exercise in a training session, Greg was paired with Marcus. Playing the part of a skeptical customer, Marcus challenged Greg with tough questions and scenarios designed to test his patience and empathy. To Greg's surprise, he handled them well, earning a nod of approval from Marcus afterward. You're improving, Marcus told him later. Keep this up, and you'll not only redeem yourself, you'll set an example for others. Though Greg still had moments of doubt, he knew he was on the right path. For the first time in years, he felt like he was growing, not just as a manager, but as a person. And while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he was determined to prove that change was possible, even for someone like him. Weeks turned into months, and the changes Marcus implemented began to take root at Prestige Motors. The dealership transformed, not just in appearance but in spirit. Employees who once hesitated to engage with certain customers now approached everyone with warmth and professionalism. Customer satisfaction ratings soared, and word spread quickly about the welcoming atmosphere at Prestige Motors. People from all walks of life felt comfortable walking through the doors, knowing they'd be treated with respect. Greg Harper was no exception to this growth. Though his journey had been rocky, he worked tirelessly to prove himself, not just to Marcus, but to his coworkers and the community. He attended every training session, participated actively in discussions, and even volunteered to lead workshops on overcoming bias. Slowly but surely, Greg began shedding the prejudices that had once clouded his judgment. One sunny afternoon, a young black woman named Jasmine walked into the showroom. She looked around nervously, her eyes scanning the rows of gleaming cars. It was her first time buying a car, and she wasn't sure where to start. Spotting her hesitation, Greg approached her with a warm smile. Hi there, he said kindly. Can I help you find something today? Jasmine blinked, surprised by his friendly tone. Maybe, she replied cautiously. I'm just looking for now. No problem, Greg assured her. Take your time. If you have any questions or need advice, I'm here to help. His demeanor was calm and inviting, putting Jasmine at ease. As they talked, Greg learned that Jasmine was a recent college graduate starting her first job. She wanted a reliable car but didn't want to overspend. Instead of rushing her toward an expensive model, Greg patiently explained different options, highlighting fuel efficiency, maintenance costs, and financing plans. He even shared stories of other first-time buyers who had started small and upgraded later. By the end of their conversation, Jasmine left feeling empowered and informed. A few days later, she returned to purchase a compact sedan, the perfect fit for her needs. As she signed the paperwork, she thanked Greg sincerely. You made this so much easier for me, she said. I really appreciate it. Greg smiled, though inside, he felt a wave of pride. For years, he judged people based on superficial traits, missing opportunities to connect with individuals like Jasmine. Now, helping her choose her first car reminded him why he'd entered the sales industry in the first place, to assist people in achieving their goals. Word of Greg's turnaround reached Marcus, who couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. One day, as they crossed paths in the showroom, Marcus stopped and placed a hand on Greg's shoulder. I noticed the effort you've been putting in, Marcus said. It hasn't gone unnoticed. Greg nodded, his voice filled with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I owe you a lot for giving me a second chance and pushing me to grow. I won't let you down. Marcus gave him a reassuring pat. You're already proving yourself, Greg. Keep going. The transformation extended beyond Greg. Other employees followed his example, embracing the values Marcus had instilled. Customers frequently praised the staff for their kindness and attentiveness, and sales numbers reflected the positive shift. What had once been a rigid, image-focused dealership was now a beacon of inclusivity and trust. Though challenges remained, old habits die hard after all. The progress was undeniable. Prestige Motors wasn't just selling cars anymore. It was building relationships, one customer at a time, and for Marcus, seeing his vision come to life was worth every challenge along the way. A year had passed since Marcus Thompson took over Prestige Motors, and the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The dealership had become more than just a place to buy cars. It was a symbol of progress, inclusivity, and second chances. Customers from all backgrounds flocked to the showroom, drawn not only by the wide selection of vehicles, but also by the reputation for exceptional service. Employees worked with renewed energy, proud to be part of an organization that valued respect and fairness above all else. To celebrate the dealership's success, Marcus organized a special event, a community open house. The showroom sparkled under strings of fairy lights, and tables laden with food and refreshments lined the space. Families, young professionals, and longtime residents mingled happily as staff members greeted them with smiles. At the center of it all stood Marcus, shaking hands and thanking everyone for their support. As the evening wore on, Marcus stepped onto a small stage set up near the entrance. The crowd quieted, turning their attention to him. Holding a microphone, Marcus began to speak, his voice warm and sincere. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, scanning the faces before him. "When I first walked into this dealership, I didn't know what to expect. What I found was a team full of potential and a chance to make something truly special." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We've come a long way since then. Together, we built a culture where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. We've shown that businesses can thrive not just by selling products, but by building relationships. And most importantly, we've proven that change is possible." The audience erupted into applause, many nodding in agreement. Among them was Greg Harper, who stood near the back of the room, listening intently. Over the past year, Greg had grown in ways he never thought possible. He'd gone from being a man defined by bias to someone others looked up to as an example of redemption. As Marcus continued speaking, Greg felt a surge of gratitude for the opportunity to grow, for the lessons he'd learned, and for the leadership that had guided him through it all. Marcus went on to highlight specific milestones, the record-breaking sales figures, the glowing customer reviews, the partnerships formed with local organizations to promote diversity and inclusion. But he saved his final remarks for the people who made it happen. "None of this would have been possible without each and every one of you," he said, gesturing to the staff. "You've embraced change, challenged yourselves, and created something extraordinary. I'm proud to call you my team." After the speech, employees gathered around Marcus, congratulating him and sharing stories of how the changes had impacted their lives. Greg approached last, his expression earnest. "Mr. Thompson," he began, extending his hand, "thank you for everything. You didn't just save this dealership, you saved me too." Marcus shook Greg's hand firmly, smiling. "You did the hard work, Greg. All I did was give you the tools. Remember, it's not where you start, it's where you end up that matters." As the celebration wound down, Marcus reflected on the journey. That day a year ago, when he'd been dismissed and humiliated, could have ended in bitterness. Instead, it became the catalyst for meaningful change, not just within Prestige Motors, but within the hearts and minds of those who worked there. Prestige Motors wasn't perfect. No business ever was, but it was proof that progress was possible when people committed to doing better. And as Marcus locked up the showroom later that night, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road ahead would always bring new challenges, but one thing was certain. Prestige Motors would continue to shine as a beacon of hope, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness and respect could leave a lasting legacy. The next morning, Marcus Thompson arrived at Prestige Motors dressed impeccably in a tailored navy blue suit. His polished shoes clicked against the tiled floor as he entered the showroom, exuding an aura of authority that left no room for doubt about his role. Gone was the casual hoodie. Today, Marcus was all business. Employees who had witnessed or heard about the previous day's incident exchanged nervous glances as they watched him move with purpose through the space. Greg Harper was already seated at his desk when Marcus walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept much the night before, his face pale and his hair slightly disheveled. As soon as Greg spotted Marcus, his body stiffened, and he quickly stood up, fumbling to straighten his tie. "Mr. Thompson," Greg began hesitantly, stepping forward with a forced smile. "Good morning." Marcus nodded curtly, but didn't stop walking. Instead, he headed toward the small conference room at the back of the dealership, signaling for Greg to follow him. The air between them felt heavy with unspoken tension. Other employees watched silently as the two men disappeared behind closed doors. Inside the conference room, Marcus took a seat at the head of the table and gestured for Greg to sit across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Marcus studied Greg carefully, noting the way his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his cuffs. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "So," Marcus said calmly, leaning back in his chair, "let's talk about yesterday." Greg swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Sir, I want to apologize for my behavior," he stammered, his voice tinged with desperation. "I had no idea who you were, and I acted poorly. It won't happen again." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "That's good to hear," he replied evenly. "But tell me, Craig, why did you treat me the way you did? Was it because of how I was dressed, or was it something else?" Greg hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. He shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. "It wasn't personal, sir," he mumbled. "I just thought, well, we get a lot of people coming in here pretending to be interested in cars when they're not serious buyers. I didn't mean to offend anyone." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Let me ask you this," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "If I walked in wearing a designer suit instead of a hoodie, would your reaction have been different?" Greg opened his mouth to respond but stopped short. The truth hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. After a long pause, Greg sighed deeply, slumping back in his chair. "Probably," he admitted reluctantly. "But it's not just about clothes, it's about appearances. This dealership has a certain image to maintain, and sometimes I make assumptions based on that." Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this answer. "Appearances," he repeated softly. "You judged me based on what I wore instead of taking the time to find out who I really am. That's a dangerous habit, Greg, not just for you, but for this entire dealership." Greg nodded miserably, his pride crumbling under Marcus's steady gaze. "I understand, sir. I truly do. And I promise, I'll work harder to treat everyone fairly moving forward." Marcus regarded him for a moment longer before speaking again. "I appreciate the apology, but words aren't enough. Actions matter more. From now on, I expect every customer who walks through those doors to be treated with respect, no exceptions. If I hear of any further incidents like yesterday, there will be consequences." Greg nodded eagerly, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You won't regret giving me another chance." Marcus stood up, signaling the end of their meeting. "We'll see," he said simply. As Greg hurried out of the room, Marcus allowed himself a small sigh. He knew changing the culture at Prestige Motors wouldn't happen overnight. But one thing was clear: the journey had begun, and there was no turning back.